Good afternoon. Welcome to today's press conference. We have with us today Deputy Financial Secretary Mr. Michael Wong, Secretary for Transport and Logistics Mr. Lam Sai-hong, Secretary for Development Ms. Bernadette Ling, Mr. Chris Soon, Secretary for Labour and Welfare, Permanent Secretary for Transport and Logistics Ms. Macy Chan, and also Mr. Lau, Permanent Secretary for Development, as well as Mr. Ho, Deputy Commissioner of Labour Department. The administration will first give a PowerPoint presentation, and then the floor will be open for questions. Good afternoon, friends of the media. Together with the three secretaries, I will brief you on the various arrangements and measures to tackle labor shortage in Hong Kong. I will first give an introduction, and then the secretaries will be giving you the details. Hong Kong faces a structural labor force shrinkage due to population aging, and there is a prevailing labor crunch in various labor-intensive sectors and jobs, especially the construction and transport sectors. The government will take a resolute action to tackle the serious and imminent labor shortage. We must not allow it to become a bottleneck in Hong Kong's economic revival and development and affect people's livelihood. Upon careful consideration, the government will adopt two measures. We have made reference to the special scheme to import care workers for residential care homes, and we will draw up sector-specific labor importation schemes for the construction and transport sectors. We will also enhance the coverage and operation of the supplementary labor scheme SLS for other sectors. These are targeted, proactive and robust measures having regard to Hong Kong's overall interests and the urgent needs for economic development, whilst balancing the interests and demands of various stakeholders. In introducing new measures and new arrangements, the government will continue to abide by the long-standing principles. First, the government's labor policy will continue to accord priority to local workers. This is a very clear overarching principle. On tackling the labor squeeze, our top priority is to ensure priority is given to local employment. However, some sectors have continued to experience labor crunch despite the best endeavors made through training and other incentive measures. And on the premise of ensuring priority to local employment, it is necessary to import workers on an appropriate scale to relieve labor shortage. This is an option we must consider to ensure that there is sufficient impetus to drive economic development. And as I met with different sectors recently, I've emphasized that we are not taking this opportunity to import cheap labor. In fact, both the supplementary labor importation scheme and other labor importation scheme for the construction and transport sectors require that the wage levels of imported workers to be not lower than the median wages of the relevant local positions. Finally, we are not going to resolve labor shortage simply by importing workers. We'll continue to enhance education and training. There are other measures. For example, employees will be required to make one-off payment of the employees' retraining levy of $400 per workers. The levy will fund the Employee Retraining Board, ERB, in ramping up training and retraining of local workers. The government will also join various sectors in tackling labor shortage by taking a multi-pronged approach, such as expanding recruitment, improving work environment, driving I&T application, and enhancing productivity. I would now invite Mr. Christian, Secretary for Labour and Welfare, to give you more details of the schemes. Thank you, Deputy Financial Secretary. In the next few minutes, I will be going through the details with you. As mentioned by the Deputy Financial Secretary, Hong Kong is now facing a structural labour force shrinkage. Comparing to the peak in 2018, excluding foreign domestic helpers, the labour force reached the peak of 3.68 million. In 2022, excluding foreign domestic helpers, the force has shrunk to $3.46 million. 3.46 million people. So the labour force shrank, especially for the low-skilled sector, by about 160,000. So there is a prevailing manpower crunch in Hong Kong. And as the Deputy Financial Secretary put it, the labour force is the linchpin to our economic development, and we have all along been attaching importance to local workers. Now, as you can see on this slide, we want to enhance training for local labor. The Employees Retraining Board, ERB, provides 100,000 training places a year. The VTC also offers over 100,000 training places per year. Now, some are placement-tied training places, which provides a monthly allowance to candidates. It now stands at $5,800. We would like to increase the amount of allowance from $5,800 to $8,000 so as to maximize the benefits of local workers' training. As for labor importation, we will take a two-pronged approach. One is a sector-specific labor importation scheme, making reference to the special scheme to import care workers for residential care homes. We will introduce two labor importation schemes for the construction and transport sectors. The next prong is to enhance the supplementary labor scheme for other sectors. I will go through them with you in a moment. Now, on to sector-specific schemes. There are 6 common features. We will regularly report to the Labour Advisory Board. That means for every 6 months, we will report to the Labour Advisory Board on the implementation of sector-specific schemes. Now, the 2 secretaries in a moment will also tell you about the designated officers for approving the importation. And once approval is given, the employer must pay the employee's retraining fee or levy at $400 per worker per month. And the manning ratio is on a par with that of the supplementary labor importation scheme. That is 1 to 2, 1 imported labor to 2 full-time local staff. As for accommodation arrangement, we allow employers to choose either to arrange for accommodation in Hong Kong for the imported labor or to provide accommodation on the mainland for the imported labor. Employers are at liberty to decide which place to provide accommodation, and this will also apply to the enhanced SLS. And if the prospective imported workers are mainland residents, employers must recruit the imported workers through the Foreign Labour Service Cooperation Enterprises approved by the Ministry of Commerce on the mainland. So this will be clearly spelled out, be it sector-specific schemes or the supplementary labour scheme. workers can only be imported from the mainland after approval has been given by the mainland authorities.
I'll be now taking you through the scheme that is targeted at the construction sector. So I have some statistics. The Construction Industry Council, they conduct forecasts on a regular interval, and as of February, in the coming 5 years, they forecast that skilled and semi-skilled workers, and including technicians, that in 2023 there will be a shortfall of 14,000 to 20,000, and by 2027 it will be exceeding 40,000. So in the table, aside from the technicians, today we're not talking about technicians because the government had previously had a different scheme, had relaxed some policies regarding technicians, and on this occasion we have a sector-specific policy, and we're targeting skilled workers and technicians, and in this scheme it will be applicable for these two categories. And we also have some sectors that have specific staff shortfalls, and we have a quota ceiling of 12,000, and that is lower than the forecast shortfall. So this indicates that the imported workers are just one measure in a multi-pronged approach. The government and the industry need to conduct training and encourage the use of IT. In the 12,000 worker quota, we have specified the applicable range. So we will assign priority to public sector construction works, and they have to exceed a certain budget amount. They have to be of a substantial scale. So why do we have this consideration? Is because for public sector construction work, we are dealing with land formation, public rental housing, airport facilities, hospitals, and so on. So these cater to significant public interests, and we also have the government construction departments or other statutory bodies that are regulating these projects. So regarding the importation of labor, we believe that we can instill more confidence when we implement this. We will also consider special cases for private construction works, but they need to prove that the workers they import, they have to prove that there is a limited supply of these workers. So we believe we won't have a lot of private construction works that will be using this quota, but as long as we can alleviate the demand for workers in the public sector, we believe that there should be a subsequent alleviation in the private sector. So for the importation of construction workers, they have to be in approved works and in specific construction sites. So we will also require the applicants to provide additional training places for local personnel, no less than 10% of the approved quota for importation. It's because we have to bear in mind that while we're importing labor, we also have to cater to local workers, and we have to respect their rights. So under the supplementary labor scheme, some works had exemption. We had mentioned that 1 to 2 manning ratio previously, but on this occasion, in this scheme, we will indicate that all applications, even though the majority are public sector construction work, they still have to comply with the 1 to 2 manning ratio. That is, the importation of labor versus local labor has to comply with a 1 to 2 ratio. We also have a lot of labor participation in the mechanism, and I'll explain how they participate. Now, in the whole approval process, there are some key areas. Now in the PowerPoint, you can see at the bottom, we will reinstate a task force on short-term labor supply. So this task force is convened by the Construction Industry Council. They have staff side and labor side participants. They will investigate the median salary levels, the number of workers in the sector, and will provide feedback to the government. At the second level, we suggest forming a new consultative committee. So the Secretary for Development and Public Works will chair this committee, and they will take the feedback from the task force, such as the number of job sectors, the median salary levels, and all the they will provide feedback on these issues. And then we will have an interdepartmental committee. This is an internal government committee where they will handle the different applications. We will submit that to the Development Bureau Secretary, and finally the approval will be handled by the Permanent Secretary for Development Works. And I also want to describe for you that the importation in the construction sector, we have accommodation requirements. Now, traditionally, the government has required the employer provide accommodation, and on this occasion, we are importing a larger number. We have a quota of 12,000, so we understand that the society might be worried that might add pressure to local housing. Now, we feel that the construction industry has the conditions to, we can apply an extra condition on them. That is, under the quota scheme, any applicant that is approved and the employer, if they want to provide accommodation in Hong Kong, then they have to do so in specified areas. These specified areas include the on-site accommodation, construction sites. If they are large enough, the employer can provide modular housing, and if the construction site cannot allow for that, we will require the employer to provide centralized quarters. So we believe that we do have some large infrastructure projects in our northern metropolis. So in Yuen Long, Tam Mei, one community quarantine facility, we want to utilize that site, and we can use it as a centralized quarters for the construction industry, and the CIC can manage that. So with the existing importation labor scheme, the employers, when they provide accommodation, if they rent premises, they will be paying rent. So if they were to deploy the centralized quarters, they will similarly have to pay rent to the CIC, and according to the existing scheme, they can make a reasonable deduction in the employee's salary. And lastly, I want to emphasize that, as I said just now, importation of labor is just one policy amongst our multi-pronged approach. We do have training for local workers and the utilization of IT. So the CIC will utilize 107 million from the recent appropriation to provide on-the-job training allowance for trainees enrolled in construction-related programs. We also have 2.2 billion of the Construction Innovation and Technology Fund to promote adoption of innovation and technology. Now, we will continue these schemes and programs. We will enhance job opportunities, and I'll now hand over the time to Transport and Logistics.
Secretary for Transport and Logistics will now have the floor. Thank you. Good afternoon, friends from the media, citizens. In the past few months, we have taken stock of the overall manpower situation of the aviation industry. We have also actively liaised with the industry. According to the information we have, for aviation industry, the transport sector, including public light bus and the coach trade, manpower squeeze is the most serious. The local labor force cannot meet its manpower demand for the sustainable development of the aviation industry and the transport sector, so we are going to import labor. We start with the aviation industry. After full resumption of travel with the world, the aviation industry has rebounded, and air passenger throughput was 50% of pre-pandemic level in April. However, there have been a drastic drop in the available manpower for the industry, especially for frontline airport staff. According to the Airport Authority's survey, the demand will increase from the current manpower of 53,000 to 69,000 by the end of 2024. So there will be a shortfall of 16,000. And 75% of the shortfall relates to frontline airport staff. Despite enhanced local and recruitment efforts, only about 2,000 applications have been received in these major job fairs. The situation is undesirable. The manpower squeeze will hamper the development of the aviation industry and economic revival in Hong Kong. According to the 14th five-year plan, one of the 8 centers to be established in Hong Kong is the International Aviation Hub. In light of the national strategy, we must put in place proactive and robust measures to tackle the manpower shortage. In light of recruitment difficulties, we will target 10 frontline non-supervisory airport job types with acute manpower shortage. We will set a quota capped at 6,300, about 50% of the total shortfall of the airport staff, whereas for other job types, they will be replenished, they will be filled by the local workforce. Now, key features of the scheme. The employees should be aviation-related companies with direct contractual relationship with the airport authority in Hong Kong. As for quota allocation, we will give consideration to the market share and the job types, etc. And the application will be approved in about a month's time if all documents are ready. As for accommodation arrangements, the airport authority will coordinate daily cross-boundary transportation. Similar to local workers traveling to and from the airport, the imported workers will bear the cost of transportation, and we will also implement measures to tackle abuse. I emphasize that whilst putting forward this scheme, we will accord priority to local recruitment. One deterring factor is the long journey time and high transportation costs for local workers. So for employees participating in the scheme, they will be required to pay to the airport authority an additional amount of $400 per month for each imported worker. A separate sum will also have to be contributed by the airport authority, and the payments will be used to support the initiative to alleviate the transport fare burden on local airport staff. Meanwhile, we will ramp up our effort in holding local job fairs. We will also enhance training, including courses operated by the airport authority, as well as the HKIAA, as well as the courses under the Maritime and Aviation Training Fund. Next, I will turn to the public light bus and coach trade. The trade provides services to the public, is closely related to people's livelihood, and pivotal to supporting the recovery of our economy. In the trade, the manpower shortage problem has existed due to population aging and significant loss of coach drivers due to COVID-19. We're unable to meet the demand for cross-boundary passenger carrying services. This will affect our economy. And according to the preliminary findings of the local survey, we are short of about 2,000 and 1,600 drivers in the public light bus and the coach trade, respectively, accounting for about 20% of the total manpower. Despite recruitment efforts, there is still a glaring shortage. In light of the above, the PLB operators will be allowed to import drivers with a quota ceiling of 900 PLB drivers and 800 coach drivers, respectively, altogether 1,700. That's about 50% of the driver shortfall. The application should be considered and approved in about 1 to 2 months. Accommodation. It's for the PLB or coach driver operators to arrange accommodation for the imported drivers in the vicinity of their servicing areas. As for entry requirement, the imported driver should hold a recognized non-local driving license for driving motor vehicles of private car, light goods vehicles for 1 year or more. There will also be a driving test for the imported drivers. They are also required to complete the pre-service courses as well as practical driving training. They must familiarize themselves with the relevant training routes before they can provide service. Meanwhile, we'll step up local recruitment and relax certain requirements. We'll also enhance training and in order to attract new blood. The Transport Department will also relax the requirements for commercial vehicles license application. We also promote diversified local recruitment channels, etc. These measures have yielded results, and yet they are not sufficient in tackling the manpower squeeze in the trades. We will be providing pre-service courses and practical driving training for the imported drivers, and we'll be collaborating with the ERB to design training programs for local drivers. And that's about the labor importation scheme for the transport sector. I emphasize once again that we accord priority to local employment, and we also only import labor on an appropriate scale on the premise of safeguarding the wage levels of local workers, so as to safeguard our position as an international aviation hub and international logistics center. I will now give the floor to Mr. Christian to say more on the Enhanced Supplementary Labor Scheme, ESLS. Now, the two secretaries just now introduced the special labor importation scheme for the construction sector and the transport sector for you. But still, there is a prevailing manpower shortage across different sectors. One way of tackling this issue is to enhance the SLS, so that apart from the two sectors mentioned, through the enhanced SLS, they can also apply for labor to be imported. We have struck a proper balance between ensuring employment priority for local labor and allowing greater flexibility for employers. Now, the SLS will be renamed as Enhanced Supplementary Labor Scheme, ESLS. There are 26 job categories, and basically for unskilled or low-skilled posts under the original SLS, they are not eligible, but we will suspend the general exclusion of these job categories and the unskilled, low-skilled posts for 2 years so that labor can be imported.
So I won't read out the 26 categories. So we have retained some key elements of the supplementary labor scheme, including a 4-week local recruitment. That is, after the application, the Labor Department will arrange for 4 weeks of local recruitment, and Labor Department will analyze each case. They will examine the different categories, whether the employer is sincere in recruiting locally. They will also consult the Labor Advisory Board and make a final decision. Now, since the enhanced labor scheme will be implemented, we do have some new enhancement measures. We will disseminate the relevant information to employers. They will be made aware of ESLS. We will also streamline the application process. We will also fine-tune the workflow of Labor Advisory Board. So put simply, we have set some key indicators for ourselves. So we hope that in the new ESLS, the enhanced supplementary labor scheme, so after completing the processing of an application, we hope that we can provide an outcome within 3 months of the application. And I need to explain that we do have some sector programs. So if they are included in the sector programs, we will not accept applications from sectors covered by the sector-specific schemes. So that would conclude my description. So thank you for listening. We are now happy to take any questions you might have. So please raise your hand, and our staff will provide you with a microphone. And please keep your questions to 2 at a time. The last row. RTHK, just now you referred to the importation labor scheme, and the salary cannot be lower than the median salary. So the import labor, when the numbers go up, will that lead to a lower median salary? Will that suppress local wages? Will that mean that local workers will suffer lower wages? And second, on the processing, you have a mechanism. So normally when an application is processed, how long will it take typically, and when will the first batch of imported labor arrive in Hong Kong? For public light buses and coaches, aside from getting a local license, how long will the training take? Because mainland drivers and local drivers drive on different sides of the road. They might have different driving habits, and in case of accidents, well, how will insurance deal with claims? Let me respond to the issue on mechanism. So we have 2 schemes that will receive applications next month. So as long as their information is complete, it can be it will be handled as soon as possible. Now, with imported labor, we include different sectors, so we hope that we can receive applications by September. Now, currently, it will take 5 months, and we hope to shorten it to 3 months, and that is our application mechanism. I'll now hand it over to Mr. Sun. Now, we require that the imported labor wage cannot be lower than the typical median salary of that specific sector. So you need to understand that first, the imported labor, they are using the median salary at that point in time, so it will not be lower than average. And in the sector, local workers are the majority. So imported labor is only a supplementary addition. So you understand the median, it means that it's in the middle. So if the local workers are the majority, then median reflects the majority of local workers. So the design is to ensure that we don't import low wage workers. We don't want to impact local workers. Now, regarding driver training, I'll have logistics and transport answer. So the imported drivers, first of all, when they arrive in Hong Kong, they need to get a private car driver's license, and the employer will then arrange for them to undertake road tests and training. So we forecast that they will need 10 to 12 hours of road practice, and then they will take a test. At the same time, they need to take training before they start their work. So whether it is a bus or coach, they have to familiarize with road conditions in Hong Kong, and the employer also needs them to familiarize with the driving routes. Regarding the insurance question, once they receive a driver's license, the insurance can cover these drivers.
From the South China Morning Post. So firstly, we want to just again ask a little bit more about the timeline. When will the government expect this new imported labor under this imported labor scheme to start? And also, when would this expected 20,000 people be expected to arrive in Hong Kong to start their work? And also, we'd like to clarify a little bit more about the targeted imported labor, whether the government's only targeting to import labor from the mainland, or is it also open to people from other regions as well? And also, we'd like to ask a little bit more about the residency status, whether these imported labor will perhaps be granted permanent residency in the future, or is there any possibility of that, and what's the government's rationale? And lastly, we wanted to ask whether the government has any plans to expand the currently allowed quotas for this imported labor in the future, and also would it plan to cover other sectors as well, and what would its criteria for expanding these quotas would be? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I count 5 questions. I'll try my best to deal with them. First of all, regarding the timing. For the 2 sector-specific schemes, we look forward to receiving applications in July, so in a few weeks' time. And we hope to be able to complete processing applications within about 2 months. So that's our pledge. For the enhanced SLS, for the enhanced supplementary labor scheme, because of the number of job categories is more, so we look forward to start receiving applications within the 3rd quarter, so before September. And to be able to process the applications, the current timeline is about 5 months. We hope to be able to shorten it to around 3 months. We don't expect to fully utilize the quota in the first year, so it would be a progressive process. But we do believe that the quotas may be fully utilized sometime next year. The schemes are not just open to mainland workers, but our experience in the past has been that it would mainly be mainland workers because of the geographic proximity and convenience. With regard to residents, while they're in Hong Kong, they will be non-Hong Kong permanent residents. The situation is quite similar to other imported workers under the current supplementary labor scheme. So they would not, their status would not change from non-Hong Kong permanent resident to Hong Kong permanent resident. In other words, after they finish their work contract in Hong Kong, they will leave. We do not have any specific predictions about future developments. We'll monitor the situations closely. So we'll look at the need of our economy. We'll also look at the impact of the various new arrangements and new schemes before determining the next steps. Thank you very much.
下一個提問，開邊嗰排。
Next question. Out there, this lady in black on the right-hand side. I'm from Ming Pao. Good afternoon. The Labour Advisory Council Labour representatives already expressed that despite the government's intention to expand the SLS, the government should not circumvent the Labour Advisory Board, even for the other scheme. The government should go by the LAB. Now, I see the sector-specific schemes have again circumvented the LAB. Is it a way to scrap the tripartite discussion mechanism? Is there a timeline for these schemes? Another question. It is said that the SLS will be enhanced. 26 job categories at the moment are excluded, but the exclusion will be lifted for 2 years. Now, these are job types for grassroots, such as cooks, waiters. Why is it that you are expanding or relaxing the criteria on a large scale to allow labor importation? Is it that for these 26 job categories, there is also a prevailing manpower shortage? Will this take jobs away from local workers? Thank you. On the role of the Labour Advisory Board and the enhanced supplementary labour scheme, Mr. Chris Sun can take the questions. And let me take your question on the time frame. We do not have a time frame in mind as to when the two schemes will come to an end. We will monitor the situation. It depends on the demand in the coming years. Say, for the construction industry, at least we envisage a huge manpower demand because of the number of large-scale projects coming on stream. At the airport, we see a similar situation. The third runway project has yet to complete. We at the moment only reach 50% of capacity comparing to the pre-pandemic level. And as we emphasized before, we don't expect the manpower shortage to be fully addressed through labor importation. We want more workers to join the relevant industries. Now, if the schemes only run for a short period of time, it is unrealistic. So we don't have a time frame in mind. I will defer to Mr. Sun to take the two other questions. Thank you. The Labour Advisory Board plays a pivotal role. And as the Chief Executive already explained, for each case under the SLS, it will have to go through the Labour Advisory Board. The Labour Advisory Board will consider first and foremost whether there is a genuine vacancy. We have a special scheme to import care workers for residential care homes, and we're introducing two more sector-specific schemes for the construction and the transport sectors. And this is beyond doubt that we have a long-standing structural labor shortage for the sectors concerned. And as such, it is unrealistic to consult the Labour Advisory Board on whether there is a shortage in this sector. But we're not undermining the importance of the Labour Advisory Board. We now have 3 sector-specific schemes for the care home sector, for the transport and the construction sector. And as we explained just now, we plan to report to the Labour Advisory Board every 6 months, so that the Labour Advisory Board will continue to play its role. We are not circumventing the LAB, in other words. To take the next question, indeed, under the enhanced SLS, the general exclusion of job categories will be lifted, but this will not affect local employment. because we are lifting the general exclusion for 2 years. And for each application under the enhanced SLS, the employer will still need to show proof that there is a shortage to the Labor Advisory Board. That is, there is a genuine shortage and that local recruitment is not successful. We will continue to monitor very stringently the compliance of the 4-week rule. That is, persistent local recruitment difficulties for 4 weeks. We will rigorously play the gatekeeping role to ensure that priority is accorded to local workers. Only when these jobs are not taken up by local workers would we allow the cases to be approved. So it's clear that priority will be given to local workers. Next, I'm from Cable. For sector-specific scheme, there is no time limit. And then you mentioned the quotas will be exhausted by next year. When will the next review be done in terms of changing the number of quotas? For the construction sector, do you have statistics in relation to the trade with the most serious shortfall? Say for concrete workers, you have 10,000 registrations, but only some 5,000 workers actually taking up jobs. Why don't you work on the 5,000 registered workers not taking up jobs and instead turn to imported workers? As for PLB drivers, the median age is now 70 years old. Now, if you import PLB drivers, how do you ensure that these drivers in their 70s won't be replaced? I will first take the first question and I'll defer to Mr. Lam to take the questions relating to the transport sector. Now, for the quota ceiling, 12,000, this is the ceiling. It's a fixed quota. Now, for some workers, upon completing an employment contract, they may leave. So we do not have a timetable as to when the quota is to be adjusted. We'll monitor the market situation. But after we introduce the schemes, we will be reporting to the Labor Advisory Board in 6 months. So we'll discuss with them. That means we'll continue to monitor the situation. You also mentioned the 2 sectors. Perhaps I'll defer to the Secretary for Development to take the question on the construction sector. You mentioned 2 questions relating to the construction sector. One, the trades with the manpower shortfall and the number of registered workers. The Construction Industry Council provides manpower projections on an annual basis. In terms of skilled, semi-skilled workers and technicians, the CIC provides a forecast of manpower shortfall by trade or by job types. So the CIC will be reviewing the manpower situation for the different trades, and that they will need to submit the data for our consideration. Now let me give you an example. For skilled workers with a serious shortage, I can give you some apparent examples: scaffolders, woodworkers, concrete pouring workers, machine operators. Details can be found in the report published by the CIC. Now, you mentioned another point, that is the number of registered workers with the CIC. In fact, there are some 600,000 workers registered. We need to import labor because despite the 600,000 workers being registered, we need to take a careful look at the active workers at the construction site, some 400,000 of them only. These are real figures because the Construction Industry Council keeps records of registered workers working at different construction sites. So I mentioned some 400,000 active workers. What about the remaining 200,000 registered workers? According to the CIC's survey, in fact, many of these workers have retired or changed to another trade. They just keep their registration with the CIC.
問題
For existing PLB drivers, will they be substituted? Let me provide some statistics. For public light bus, we have a vacancy of 2,000, and in our scheme, we intend to set a cap of 900. So we still have a vacancy of 1,000 that can be filled by local workers. So I hope more local workers can join the industry in the public light bus as a public light bus driver. So they won't be driven out by imported labor. Hong Kong 01, I want to understand the situation regarding quarantine accommodation. So will these quarantine facilities need to be retrofitted? How much money is involved if they are retrofitted? And what are the requirements on employers? They might have to rent some premises and have 8 people living there. So I've also heard that the imported labor, they have to pay for their own transport costs to and from the airport. Will that affect the scheme? So if we have cross-border workers, will they have to be issued with something like a blue card? So I'll have Miss Bernadette Lin answer. Regarding the site in Taipei that is being used as a community quarantine facility, we will lease it out to CIC as quarters. Now, the scale we mentioned just now, we now have some 2,000 quarantine facilities, and in each of these quarantine facilities, it can accommodate a bed. So we can accommodate some 8,000 people. Just now, you referred to some retrofitting. Now, in the future, if we have some living quarters, we want to have some multi-function rooms, some cooking facilities. So the retrofitting expense is limited. The CIC will conduct some forecasts, but most importantly, we need to get feedback. We need to collect rent from the employers that use these facilities. So you don't have to worry about the costs. We will apply the user pay principle. We also have some paperwork. We need to make an application to the town planning board because we are converting a quarantine facility into accommodation. So including the retrofitting. So we hope that it can be ready for use by October. Now, regarding the living quarters situation, we do have some criteria. Will we have unsuitable accommodation? Now, we have experience in this area under the supplementary labor scheme. If you include the elderly care workers experience, we do have some safeguard measures. So when the employer rents a premise and when they rent some premises and have workers living there, we will see whether it's suitable. Your other question about cross-border commuting. Now, just now, Mr. Lam said that we have some 6,300 people, and with an extra 4,000, 5,000 might have to travel by way of the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau bridge. So the airport has different shifts. So the workers will arrive in shifts. So immigration have participated in our work. They can use our e-channels, so the impact is minimal. They can cross the border very expediently. Transport and logistics. Just now, our secretary mentioned that the airport has shifts. We have 3 shifts, and workers arrive in batches. So the worker needs to bear the cost of transport. Will that affect the attractiveness? Well, you don't have to worry, because they arrive and leave in batches. So regardless of the shift, they travel in batches. So as long as it's spelled out in the contract, I don't think that will affect the attractiveness. AM 730. Just now you mentioned that there is a levy for the CIC. How many public sector programs will be affected? You mentioned that there are accommodation facilities in Tampere. So for construction sites in Hong Kong South, what arrangements do employers have? And aside from Tampere, what about the other community quarantine facilities? And lastly, in transport industry, you might relax the exam criteria. How will you relax that? What if they fail the driver examination? Who will pay for the examination fees and so on? And the driver, if they have to take a license and other training, how long will it take? Regarding the situation in Tampere, I'll have Bernadette respond. First of all, regarding the location, just now you said if for sites other than Northern Metropolis, I mentioned that we have specified living quarters. One type is dependent on the construction site, or the employer might have other construction sites and they can use those sites. So the relevant employer will provide a site. If they cannot provide a construction site, then they can use our centralized quarters, and the centralized quarter is in Tampere. So I think our site will cater to the largest number of workers. They will be the closest to the construction site. But the unique aspect of construction work is that for each construction site, they will be importing a significant number of workers. So we have CIC help us manage. Then they can arrange for transport. So we can have a batch of workers coming and leaving the site. So the logistics arrangement can be handled. Your other question was about public sector programs, because they have a priority in importing labor. So we will set a fee structure, and currently the threshold is 1 billion. So the construction project has to be 1 billion, and if you look at the awards that were granted recently, a lot of them meet this criteria. So we believe the 12,000 worker quota can be utilized. Now, regarding the driver license situation, well, just now you had asked that question, and we had relaxed the commercial vehicle license before. So if you have a private vehicle license, In the past, the requirement was to have a valid license for 3 years. Now it's relaxed to 1 year. And in the importation of drivers, first of all, the employer needs to provide the driver's tests. They have to familiarize with the routes. The employer will be responsible for that. Our transport department will also cooperate with them. We'll try to shorten the exam arrangements. So we have a ceiling of 1,700, but they're not arriving at the same time. They will arrive in batches. So on each occasion we have a few hundred. So we should be able to accommodate them. We can process them in the shortest period of time. They can get the relevant driver's license and receive their training.
Next question. Let's take 2 more questions only in the interest of time. On the 3rd row, this gentleman in gray. I'm from Wenwei Pao. Now, the first question is this. The scheme is not without a time frame, as you put it, but there is a structural problem with the population. So will more similar schemes be devised? Because despite training local workers, in the long run, you may still need to import labor to address manpower shortage. Second question, you say that you will accord priority to local employment. You have safeguards to keep an eye on, say, the wage levels. Are there objective indicators, say, after some time, or even in a state of full employment, there is still the problem of mismatch in the labor market? Are there indicators to show us that indeed, despite the labor importation schemes, local employment has not been affected? You asked 2 questions. Let me try to take them. As emphasized by myself and my colleagues, it is the government's fundamental labor policy to accord priority to local workers. That is why for the sector-specific schemes, they are not permanent schemes. But we're not setting a 2 or 3 year time frame for the 2 schemes because we envisage labor shortage in the coming few years. That depends on the development progress. Now, for the supplementary labor scheme, for a long time, we have provided general exclusion to the 26 job categories. Now we are lifting this general exclusion. So we need to gauge the demand and supply. It is quite pointless to make a conjecture at this point. There is no crystal ball to predict the future development of each and every sector. Wages. Now, there is no scientific method to clearly define the changes in wages. Sometimes we need to consider the cyclical development of a particular sector, as well as economic development in Hong Kong. And it is not scientific, therefore, to single out a single sector when we consider wage levels. The requirement when labor is imported is to make sure that the wage levels will not be lower than the median wage of local workers. Now, for the median hourly wage, at the moment it stands, it far exceeds the minimum wage of $40 an hour. Last question. The 3rd row, this lady in a black jacket.
Kari from Bloomberg. I'd like to ask if you have a ballpark estimate for the total number of additional foreign workers allowed under the quota, and for the ESLS, will there be an expanded quota, or will it still be on a first-come, first-served basis? And when will you evaluate if you will further extend that past 2 years? Thank you.
Right. On the 3 sector-specific schemes, including the one for care workers that's already in place. When the quotas are all fully utilized, we'll be talking about 27,000 imported workers. So that's when the quotas are all fully utilized. 27,000 imported workers under the relevant schemes. Yeah.
同事麻煩俾翻個咪。
Sorry, dear.
Please pass the mic to this reporter.
1,000 workers more than previous years.
I wouldn't say that. It's hard to compare that way. Under the three schemes, together, the total quota stands at 27,000. And as I said before, we do not expect the quotas to be all fully utilized within the next few months. So it will be sometime next year. But then, of course, we have to look at the market situation very carefully. Your other question pertains to enhanced SLS. For that, basically, each application that comes in will have to be critically evaluated by colleagues from our Labor Department. So, well, if they qualify, they qualify. For that scheme, we do not have an upper limit. But if you look at what happens actually in the past, for the time being, the number of workers imported under the supplementary labor scheme, if we exclude the care worker sector, we're talking about between 1,000 and 2,000. So it's not that many.
好，今日記者會到呢度，唔該晒咁多位。
That's the end of the press conference. Thank you.
俾翻個咪。
係啦，請。
感謝Channel C 嘅想問。
Thank you. I'm from Channel C. I have a question on the labor import scheme for public light bus drivers. Now, the government adopts the transport policy of railway as the backbone and other public transport as the supplementary to the railway services. Now, in light of the development, do you envisage difficulty in the development of PLB trade? Because for buses, the drivers enjoy better wages and better conditions. So is the government aware of the difficulties facing the PLB trades? Another question in relation to the cost of taking driving tests, so on and so forth. Is the government aware of the number of licenses held by locals? Is it that we do have few drivers of PLB? About the 26 job categories under the ESLS, such as sales representatives, customer service, the public may not think that it is difficult to recruit local workers for these job types. First, on the PLB trade, it is the government's policy to adopt railway as the backbone of the public transportation system. Public light buses also provide services to the public. Now, as you know, in public light buses, they usually provide the last mile commuting service for residents in the community. So they have a special position in our system. So this is how we consider the difficulties in recruiting PLB drivers. In the past few years, there have been difficulties in recruiting PLB drivers. But the government is not sitting on its hands. You may recall last year when we approved the PLB fare hike, if my memory serves me right, the exercise entailed some 200 routes and the fare hikes were quite substantial. we strive to allow wiggle room for employers to recruit PLB drivers. As for the aviation industry, there are 10 job categories. 10 job types comprising a wide scope: passengers, services officers, mechanics, technicians, customer service agents. According to the Airport Authority's survey, there are difficulties in recruiting manpower for these job types compared to other job types. That is why we have included the 10 job types for the aviation industry. That's the end of the press conference. Thank you.